their country in the guise of defending it. Come on in. Aviva slid the acupuncture atlas into a canvas KPFA tote bag and stood up. Gwen leaned on Aviva's arm for help getting to her feet. Lazar watched her rise with a bright, diagnostic eye. Dread, or the skull of her baby, seemed to wedge itself deeper between the bones of Gwen's ribcage as she followed Aviva into the office. It was a dull tank. Black steel shelves, artwork by Pfizer. View of the parking lot, enlivened only by the disorder of Lazar's medical texts and by a framed photograph of him sharing the sun atop some gray-green mountain with a horse-toothed young woman and 2 Italian bicycles. Lazar and his wife or girlfriend were smiling with an air of dutiful rapture, the way you did when some total stranger agreed to snap a photo of you. Gwen fanned the flicker of pity that lit within her at the sight of Lazar's office, sensing that the light of its flame offered her sole hope of finding a path out of the mess she had gotten the birth partners into. Pity, pity alone, could mask the bitter taste of shit. So, Lazar said, here you are. Here we are, Gwen agreed, trying to stand up to his blue eyes as they further annotated her case. Edema, melasma. I know I have you 2 over a barrel, he said. I appreciate the gesture, nevertheless. He smiled insincerely to show them that he was pretending to be kidding. The flame of Gwen's pity was snuffed out. She screened a brief martial arts sequence. She actually has a black belt in Kung Fu. She screened a brief martial arts sequence in her imagination, perhaps 100 frames in all, ending with a different gesture. One that would introduce her foot to the knob of Lazar's larynx. She retained control of herself and resisted the urge to share this scenario with him. Still, his remark proved difficult for either of the partners to rally back over the net. Gwen glanced at Aviva. I spoke to Lydia this morning, that's the mom. She sounds good. I don't know if she'll pull through just fine, Lazar said. No thanks to you, said his eyes. No, Gwen was only being paranoid. She had been out of line yesterday, allowed her emotions to overcome her judgment, which was not at all like her, by nature and fiat, by habit and preference. Powerful as her emotions could be, she had known since she was 7 years old that they were good for very little, and that by contrast her judgment was uniquely reliable. It was all that and the long, bloody unraveling of the birth yesterday, and then the hormones rolling like a thunderhead across the prairie in her 3rd trimester that had led Gwen to betray her principles. From a medical point of view, Dr. Lazar had performed flawlessly. Gwen had no clinical beef with him, none worth jeopardizing their standing at the hospital, which, like that of all nurse midwives who had privileges at times, was mysteriously fragile. Now, thanks to an intervention by Aria Bernstein, who's like the head of the OB/GYN department, all that Gwen needed to do was speak the 2 most meaningless words in the English language to Paul Lazar, and she would be forgiven. An apology. What did Nat Jaffe always say, supposedly quoting his dad? It was a beautiful thing. No, a miracle of language. Cost you nothing and returned so richly. Easy for Nat to say. Yesterday was long and confusing, she began, knowing this would not do, that the logical conclusion of the line were she to follow it must be that fault lay not with Gwen or bad luck, but with poor, long, confusing yesterday afternoon. Normally, Doc, she said, I'm way too proud ever to put myself in the kind of position that I put myself into yesterday when I lost my cool. Aviva sneaked a glance at her partner, and somewhere in the profoundly dark recesses of her deep-set eyes set up an arcing flare of warning. Gwen had not come to discuss with Paul Lazar, M.D., the flow and vagaries of her pride or her cool. And so, Gwen tried. She became aware of a flat, fetid taste building up at the back of her tongue. In coming here, she saw, she had been instructed not only to swallow her pride, apologize to this man who had insulted her with a racial slur, but also to put up with his smugness and his bike shorts. Worst of all, the equine grin of his woman in the photograph, which no longer struck Gwen as pitiably friendless so much as self-satisfied, boastful, the smile of someone who felt that she most belonged on the tops of mountains. Or no, maybe the bike shorts were the worst of all. And so, she resumed, looking back over my conduct and taking into consideration the strong recommendation of my partner, who has spent her whole professional life standing up to doctors, hospitals, insurance company bean counters. Gwen, darling, Aviva said, mixing forward the Brooklyn, either to ironize the term of endearment or else by way of genuine warning. And so that you can be sure she knows the way I know that just like we have to be twice as competent, twice as careful, twice as prepared, twice as sensitive, and twice as cool under fire. Are we talking about midwives, Lazar said, or Jackie Robinson? As some Lance Armstrong wannabe doctor with a diploma from, she checked the med school sheepskin, Loma Linda. Whoa, Lazar said, excuse me? Just like she knows we have to be twice as good at everything as you all. For God's sake, Gwen, Aviva said. You can be sure that Aviva knows because she's the one who told me, and because God knows I've seen her do it enough times herself, that we also have to eat twice as much shit. Aviva fell back in her chair. So that's what I'm here to do. In 2 bites. 2 little words. Not the 2 words I might choose to say if I had any choice in the matter. But I don't. Gwen stood up, and with what felt to her like remarkable alacrity, and even for the first time in many weeks, a kind of grace. The sight of Aviva slumped and fuming in her chair, the glitter in Lazar's eyes, he would move to have their privileges pulled, no doubt about it, stirred no answer of remorse or regret. She went to the door and put her hand on the knob and turned back to Dr. Lazar, and not quite as if she were telling him to go fuck himself. Not quite as if she were suggesting that he conduct an experiment to see how far up his ass he could fit the saddle of his $3,000 Pinarello. But rather with the full force of the pity to which lately she had pinned her hopes of slipping through this ordeal without ruining everything that she and Aviva had both worked so hard to accomplish, found 2 little words to sum up her feelings toward this narrow-ass, C-sectioning, insurance company obeying excuse for a doctor, toward his entire so-called profession, toward the world that regarded everything that was human and messy, prone in equal measure to failure and joy as a process to be streamlined and standardized and portion controlled. I'm sorry. feeling as if she were kicking her way across a swimming pool, free of mass, momentum, inertia. Gwen went through the outer office to the door. Aviva caught up to her at the elevator, change jangling against the keyring in her tote bag. "I'm sorry," Gwen said again. And this time, it was not an expression of regret for the things she had said or done, but rather the opposite. Her apology was, as apologies so often are, fighting words. She was sorry, only that she was not sorry at all. Thank you. So, now, anyone come up with a question? It does not have to be about this book or any book I've ever written or any books at all. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the middle section of Telegraph Avenue, that long novel within a novel that you put in there.
The infamous 4,000-word sentence.
The bird of wide experience. That I don't know. It's like an invocation of Faulkner or something in the middle of that. Could you talk a little bit about coming up with that?
Okay, sure. The question, I'll repeat the questions because I know the sound might not be carrying. It does carry? Oh, wait, what? You're going to start playing the organ? Oh, maybe someone's getting there. There's a handheld mic. Is that it? Okay, cool. It's about the middle part of this book. Part 3 is called A Bird of Wide Experience, and it is a single sentence that is 4,000. Oh yeah, look at that. Nice.
The waters of Mars.
Fantastic.
Oh,
okay, oh good. All right. Why do I have a 4,000-word sentence in the middle of this book? How did that come to happen?
Yeah.
Why would anyone want to torture his or her readers in such a way as to stick a 4,000-word sentence in the middle of the book? I mean, I had initially what I thought were, initially it was a response to try to solve not exactly a technical problem, but a sense that I had as a writer, having arrived at the middle part of the book, that I had all these characters and their status, in the case of many of the characters, their status had changed considerably since the book started. They weren't necessarily living in the same buildings they had started out in. A husband has been thrown out by his wife, and a lot's happened, and I just needed to take stock of my characters. And I had this thing, I thought, you know what, I wish I could just sort of see them all at once. And I thought, well, maybe the reader would like to know right now, too, where everybody is. If I were making a movie, I could do this kind of a long tracking shot, like a single take, without a cut. Just have the camera just be swooping from house to apartment, over Telegraph Avenue, running towards Berkeley, then darting over the Smokehouse Burgers, and, you know, following the route that needed to be followed to sort of encircle all the characters at this one moment in time, now that we're halfway through the book. And I thought, well, I can't do that, because I don't have a camera that works that way. And I can't do some kind of simultaneous kind of thing, because that, you can't, prose fiction doesn't work the way a split screen. I mean, if I tried to do something like that, it would really be annoying for the reader. So I thought, well, maybe I could do kind of a one long sentence, like a tracking shot in the form of a sentence with no cuts, no periods, and just keep the sentence going, diving in and among the characters until I've had a chance to sort of encircle them all with that sentence. And then I thought, well, that's kind of cool, because this book is also about these two guys who own a used record store, the husbands of the two nurse midwives here. And that sentence, if I could do it, would be like the groove on a record, because when you look at a record, it looks like there are 5 tracks or 7 tracks or whatever there might be, but there's only really one long groove with these wider spaces between the individual tracks. It's just a single groove that kind of spirals inward. And I thought, well, that would be another sort of rationale for doing this. But then I thought, well, whose point of view is that sentence going to be in? Who could have a point of view that would allow the camera to dip and dive in that way? I don't want to just have it be this godlike author. That was more the narrative structure I had set up in Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. A kind of super omniscient, godlike narrator who knows everything past, present, and future and can footnote things and reach back and forth in time. And this narrator is not like that. This narrator is omniscient in the sense that he knows, or whatever gender the narrator has, knows what each character is thinking, but only when the point of view is in that particular character. And at that moment, the point of view is limited. So whose point of view could that be? I thought, well, a bird could do that. And I thought, well, I've worked with birds before. I had a parrot in my book, The Final Solution, an African gray parrot, who at one point we have an entire chapter told through his point of view. So I thought, well, if I had that parrot on hand, I could do that. And I thought, well, why don't I just put a parrot in this book? Put a bird on it. And in my mind, actually, it's the same parrot, in fact. It's Bruno from The Final Solution. 60 years later, these birds live a very long time, as I'm sure many of you know. And, it's the same bird. And now he belongs to one of my characters. But then I had this immediate problem, like, which character? Like, how do I get the bird in there? I can't just drop him in the middle of the book. He has to have been there from the beginning. So I went back to the beginning in preparation for doing this, and I thought, who could have this parrot? And I had this character who'd been there from the very beginning, from the earliest proto-versions of this book, of Mr. Jones, Cochise Jones. He's a retired jazz musician. He plays the organ, and he was fairly well known in his day in the 70s. And he's a lonely old widower. And I thought, well, duh, of course he would have a parrot. And as soon as I gave him the parrot, as soon as I made that decision, and I had to write every scene that had Mr. Jones, I now had to write a parrot into it. And all my characters had to be aware of this parrot and have perceptions of the parrot and thoughts about it. And it's not just about the parrot. When you know someone that has a parrot that talks like that, is really a person in so many ways, and yet is also, of course, a bird. Then you also have thoughts about the person who has the parrot and what kind of relationship those two have. And I had to start answering all these questions about Mr. Jones, and suddenly Mr. Jones became a real character in a way that he had never been before. And his effect on the people around him became much more significant and important, and he became this father figure to Archie, who's never really had a father in a way he had never been before. And so what started out as a sort of like, how do I get a sense of where all my characters are right now at this moment in time, became a change made to one character that then had a huge impact on all the other characters in the whole book. And it was as that was becoming apparent to me, and I was writing my way back through the opening half of the book, adding in 58, the parrot, who, by the way, was named 58 as a result of an auction that was held by Children's Fairyland to raise money for Children's Fairyland when they were, restoring a part of it. And I auctioned off the name. I had bad luck auctioning off the name of a character in a book. Twice had very bad luck in that the names of the people who won, or that they wanted to have commemorated, were so completely inappropriate and unsuitable for like the woman who won in the Yiddish Policemen's Union, right? Okay, that book, everyone is Jewish and everyone speaks Yiddish, and this woman's name was it was like Donna Bratelli or something like that. It was just impossible. I couldn't use it. And but I had to, and I ended up turning it into the name of a hotel management company that is taking over the flop house. And my character so I had to, and then I had another character that was like Pat O'Shaughnessy or something like that. It was just ridiculous. So this time I thought I'd be clever, and I said, I will name a pet in my next book. A dog. I will name a dog in my next book. I've had dogs in every single one of my books so far. I had no dog in this book, but then I had a parrot, and so I named him 58, which is what she wanted the dog to be named. I think it was after her favorite AC Transit bus line, which made it just perfect, right? So that was good. Where was I? Oh yeah, so making this one one choice to have the 4,000-word sentence. I didn't know how long it was going to be, but a long sentence turned out to be such a necessary decision for the book in ways I could never have anticipated. And then when I got to the actual chapter itself, I wrote it. I think, in a way, it's a little bit of a shame, like that people. I've had a lot of people tell me an email and tell me in person to say that they didn't even notice it was one sentence until they got to the end, and then they finished the book and somebody said, like, what about that long sentence? And they were like, what? And they went back and looked and saw. I love William Faulkner. He's one of my all-time favorite writers, absolutely in my top 10 all-time favorite writers, but that long sentence in The Bear is just worthless to me. It's like the worst sentence he ever wrote. It's not truly a one sentence. It's a pretend one sentence. I love the really long sentences at the end of Ulysses in Molly Bloom's nighttime sort of dream falling asleep monologue. And those read really beautifully and easily. They're some of the easiest to read passages in that book. If anything, that was going to be more my model for writing a long, long sentence than the Faulkner model. But I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's not like really a thorny thicket of words. It's not meant to be, certainly. So, I don't know. We'll see. That was a long answer. Who has a question? We have time for half a question.
Hi, Michael. First of all, thank you for writing such a great book about our wonderful but very beleaguered city of Oakland.
Yes.
I particularly love the passage where Gwen meets Barack Obama at the party, which her husband is playing a gig, and it's fundraising for Obama. I'm wondering a couple of things. One, how do you fit something like that in 2004, just kind of in the big puzzle of this book that you put together?
Mm-hmm.
And also wondering, have you met Barack Obama, and how did you think to put him in this book?
Sure. Let me think the right order to answer a question. Yes, I have met Barack Obama a few times. I met him for the first time when he was running for president the first time. Ayala, my wife, was a classmate of his at Harvard Law School. I like to say she was the only member of his class in Harvard Law School who was not his best friend. And partly because she had my eye on him from as soon as he sort of cropped up at all, which was even before his famous keynote address at the 2004 Democratic National Convention. Just before that, he was running for Senate. And as soon as he announced his Senate candidacy, which he did, I believe, in like 2003, maybe, something like that. Anyway, I started to sort of halfway keep an eye on him. And then, when he gave that speech, I'm sure many of you remember it. It was the speech in which he articulated a vision of the United States one which, after the events of the past 10 days or so, seems somewhat sad, but that what is most important about the United States of America are the things that we actually all have in common, not the things that divide us. The United States. And, not only did I respond to that, and I think anybody that, could find that kind of vision appealing would respond to it, but I grew up in this town called Columbia, Maryland. That was a planned community, planned and built during the 1960s, and very much the spirit of those times. And I don't mean partly in the sort of utopian, small is beautiful kind of spirit of the times, but even more in the sort of larger Great Society, post-civil rights movement, immediate aftermath of the civil rights movement. So Columbia was meant to be racially integrated, religiously ecumenical, economically integrated with the lower, middle, and upper income housing very much swirled in together, and it was designed to fulfill this. It was called a new city, and it was meant to be a new kind of city. And growing up in Columbia, especially in the first 10 years of its existence, when it hewed the closest that it ever got to fulfilling the original vision of the people who had founded it, that's what I heard him talking about when he said, what matters most are the things that bring us together, because my family had moved to Colombia, not just because we could afford a nice house there, but also because you wanted, if you moved to Colombia, it was because you wanted your kids to grow up around people of other racial backgrounds, of other economic backgrounds, of other religious backgrounds, and that what you were most interested in was finding those commonalities. So when he was talking about America, I heard him not only talking about America, but about Colombia, where I had grown up, and it just pulled this deep switch inside of me. When he announced his candidacy for the presidency, yes, I did meet him at a fundraiser very early on. My wife claims to have been the first person ever to utter the words Obama 08, which he did in like 06 at a fundraiser, and she came back from that fundraiser saying, I just saw Barack again and he's amazing, he's going to be great. And then we got out very early in support of him, and we emailed all of our friends and said, check out this Obama guy, and they all said, ha ha ha, keep dreaming. So I met him at these fundraisers and, shook his hand, and that's the extent of my actual personal contact with him. But getting to the original part of your question, the Barack Obama in this novel, who appears at this fundraiser in 2004, that's a Kerry fundraiser, a doomed event in the Berkeley Hills, is fresh off that appearance at the Democratic National Convention. He's suddenly a star, he's a big draw, so they bring him in to be a big ticket guest at this fundraiser where my guys are playing. And, I had said there needed to be, that my guys were in a band together, but I never showed them playing together. So I had this thing like, I've got to get them gigging so you can see the side of their friendship, that they actually play together. That's part of it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do it finally. Finally at the part in the book where I need to do that. What kind of gig should it be? And I thought, well, it could be a fundraiser. And, I thought bar mitzvah, whatever. No, fundraiser. So then I thought, well, my book's taking place in August 2004, which it was taking place at that particular time because I wanted it to be August, because that, to me, is the most intensely Berkeley. Berkeley is at its most intense for me in August. I'll put it that way. Just when, everything, all the smells, good and bad, are at their peak. The jasmine and the cat pee. And, I wanted it to have this end of summer kind of slightly tragic feel to it. And it was in 2004 because I needed the threat of a huge record retailing, multimedia, but heavily record and oriented retailer coming into this neighborhood and crushing the competition to actually be possible and scary and not a joke as it would shortly become when Virgin Records and Tower Records and every other major national and international retailing record chain was completely wiped out by the digital music revolution. So that seemed to me like 2004. That's like the last moment I could have this scary prospect. And then what that got me was this beautiful irony, too, that the guy that is going to crush our little guys, the reader knows that he himself is also going to be crushed very soon, but he doesn't know it yet. So I had August, I had 2004, I thought fundraiser, Kerry, big ticket, who could the guest be? Oh my God, that's right, the same month that Obama made his speech at the DNC, so let's have it be that. Let's have it be Obama. And as soon as I thought that, and this is all happening in nanoseconds, I thought the speech, Colombia, the record store in this book is a microcosm of the idea of which Colombia was itself a microcosm of the idea of the United States. This record store is a place where black people, white people, rich people, people without very much money come together, and they're united by their love of vinyl records and jazz music, and that's all that matters, is what they share. So it just seemed like the perfect thing to do. But as I was starting to say, it's not Barack Obama, without quotation marks, who appears in this novel. It's the character Barack Obama, whom I have gotten to know a little bit through meeting him and shaking his hand, but mostly just through watching him on television and listening to his speeches and the way that all of us know who Barack Obama is, we think. But that's just a character in a narrative, this massive narrative. And so all I needed to do to get that Barack Obama into this book was just cross him over from his narrative into mine, just like Munch from Homicide, crossed over to CSI. Is that CSI, right? Is that what he was on? Law and Order, right? Much crossover from Homicide to Law and Order. And I think he was also crossed over to another show at one point. And, you know, Colonel Klink from Hogan's Heroes crossed over to an episode of Batman. The Adam West Batman, remember that? Yeah, that was a high point in crossover, television crossover. And then, of course, you know, there's literary crossovers like Sherlock Holmes and Sigmund Freud and the 7% Solution. And, you know, so a crossover is a venerable tradition in fan fiction where you just take, or Batman appears in Superman, or, you know, Spider-Man shows up in the Fantastic Four. That's a crossover. So that's all I was doing, was crossing over Barack Obama, the character, into my book, and he becomes briefly one of my characters. And then I just, you know, as soon as I started to write him, I know how he talks. I know what he would say. I don't know what the real Barack Obama is thinking, but I know what the character Barack Obama is thinking. And he sees a very attractive but very pregnant, young African-American woman that's standing, hiding behind a cactus at a party. He's probably going to sidle up to her and try to, you know, draw her out a little bit and loosen her up a little bit. And there's all these rich white people standing around, and he's going to just see what she's doing there, and then he's going to draw his line to the musicians out there, and he's going to kind of start to figure it all out. Plus, they're playing a Stevie Wonder cover, and Stevie Wonder is, you know, one of his favorite artists, and so I mean, it all became very easy once I actually started to do it. Anybody could do it. Yes. Wait.
I was going to say this book reminds me very much of a Robert Altman film, and it's very specific time and locale. You have all these parallel stories going on,
right?
And they converge, you know. And when you write this, when you come up with your outline, you have your principal, you know, conflict between Archie and Gibson and the mega stores. Do these characters, these other characters, spring as a result of the main conflict, or do you write these like stories and then just like how do they converge? I'm interested in your process.
No, thank you for the comparison to Robert Altman. He's one of my all-time favorite filmmakers or artists in any medium. And, you know, I very much grew up on his best movies, Nashville and California Split and McCabe and Mrs. Miller and all those incredible movies that he made in the 70s. I've never really consciously sort of evoked him or his work or looked at him and his work as somehow being related to what I was trying to do, except when I got to this book. And then I definitely did think of him. And I knew, for example, that I was going to be hitting the reader with a whole bunch of people right up front. And I know some readers have a hard time with that, and you start to worry. You get plunged into this world, and you're like, wait, who are these people? Who's the important ones here? And it was very important for me, especially writing about multiracial people coming from different racial backgrounds, that, you know, I'm in these close points of view. If I'm in a point of view in this book, I'm really in the character's point of view, and my characters all know each other already. So my character is looking at people coming in the door of his record store. He's not thinking the black guy is coming in the door, the white guy is coming in the door, or the tall one who's the this or that. He knows them all already. So he's not going to be, generously providing clues to the reader to let you know, okay, black guy, white guy, whatever. These are his friends. They have names. They have personality traits. They're talking the way they talk. Each one of them talks in his own way, with his own style, or her own style, whatever it might be. But I wanted to be so true to those points of view that I wasn't going to be able to helpfully label the characters the way maybe it would be better. And certainly, if you're watching a movie, you have those visual cues. It's a little bit easier. Robert Altman's job, let's say, if he's plunging you into a world like he does so often, his job's made a little bit easier because Shelley Duvall doesn't look anything like Keenan Wynn, for example. So you're not going to get those two mixed up. But I couldn't see any other way to do it and still be true to the point of view. So in plunging the reader into this world and having all these different characters, and I've had people say to me, like, I was kind of confused, like 50, 60 pages, I couldn't figure out which characters were black and which characters were white. And especially because then, like, Nat, there's a reference to Nat who's white having kinky hair, and that just throws a lot of people off, apparently. I don't know why exactly, but, my response to that is sort of like, well, good, because you wouldn't if you were in this world, and I want you to be in this world. You wouldn't, that's not where you'd be at that point after 12 years of knowing each other, of all knowing each other. But I did know I was testing the reader a little bit, to maybe taxing some readers' patience a little bit. And whenever I started worrying about that, I would just think, well, Robert Altman did it. So, I don't want to lose readers. I don't want to confuse readers. I don't think it's confusing. I think it's clear. It's just clear in the way that it would be clear to someone who was already a part of the world that's being described. And I do know that takes a leap. I was just hoping the reader would just trust me. Would hold on to my hand through the opening pages, and then, you get 50, 60 pages in, it's not confusing anymore. You know who's married to whom, you know who's kid, all that kind of stuff ought to be clear. But so Robert Altman was definitely somebody that I was praying to. Oh, right.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I thought.
As far as plotting ahead of time, I don't do it. And maybe that is a little bit like Robert Altman too, and that from my understanding, especially when he was at his peak, he would just take the same kind of company of actors he was used to working on, and they would have the story figured out, kind of, and the parameters of the world figured out, and then they would just sort of create their characters on the spot with the help of the actors and the writers and the director all working together, and they would just feel their way towards the story and then do a lot in the editing of it to kind of try to get it to cohere. And a lot of his movies from that period are really messy and not so good. So I'm really messy too in my process. I don't figure things out ahead of time. I can't plot in advance. I feel like if I work it all out ahead of time, I'm done. Why write the book? I know, okay. Oh, that's why she kills him. Got it. We're done here. For me, there's a mystery to it. I don't know my characters very well when I start, and I learn them along the way. And I rewrite, and as the book goes along, I find out, like I just explained tonight about the parrot. Like, I had Mr. Jones in my book for 4 years before I knew he had a parrot. And then when I went back and gave him a parrot, he became a totally different person. And then I knew him in a way I'd never known him before. Now, how could I have sat down and plotted that out and given him a parrot from the very first outline? I don't think so. So I just can't work that way. I know there are writers who do and can, and there's even writers who very famously start at the end. They know their story so well. John Irving supposedly starts at the end. I just can't imagine working that way. All the interest would be robbed for me. All right, so Kathleen says there's time for one more question.
She had her hand up very beginning.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi, okay. Well, I actually have a question about the final solution.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of yours.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm also a huge fan of Conan Doyle's.
So am I.
Yeah, I can tell. So, I guess my question would be if you could maybe describe your relationship with the Holmes mysteries a little bit.
Absolutely.
Your favorite, and what really inspired you to kind of tackle your own Holmes.
Absolutely.
Now.
Yeah, I'm a lifelong Sherlock Holmes. I'm a Holmesian and a lover of Conan Doyle's work. That I would say Arthur Conan Doyle was the first writer that I had a relationship with, where I felt like, there were writers as a kid growing up whose books I had loved, Louise Fitzhugh or E.L. Konigsberg, but they were more like names on the title page, and they were kind of like a brand that guaranteed a certain level of quality or interest for me, but no more than that. With Conan Doyle, the voice of Dr. Watson is so lovable and so persuasive and so engaging, and it's very difficult. It has proven very difficult for 100 years now for people to really tease out the Conan Doyle and the Dr. Watson, and there's this whole sort of, as some of you probably know, there's a whole world of kind of mock scholarship in which people sort of pretend that there really was a Dr. Watson and there really was a Sherlock Holmes, and that Arthur Conan Doyle is the merely the literary agent for Dr. Watson. And I think that comes about because Watson does feel so real. But if you're not playing that kind of game, what you feel is like that behind this voice is this incredibly lovable mind, the mind of Arthur Conan Doyle, or so I presumed when I was 12 years old, 11 years old. And so I just, I read all the stories and the novels and got really swept up in the whole world of Sherlock Holmes, and to the point where I went on this search for a deerstalker cat, which, now this is like one example I give to my kids of how much better they have it than we did, back when we lived in a hole in the ground, which was that, you couldn't just go online and go deerstalker cat, size small, click, done, right? There wasn't anything like that. I went to the hat store in Baltimore. They didn't carry deerstalker hats. I went to the hat store in Washington, D.C. They didn't carry deerstalker hats. I went to hat stores everywhere I went for 3 years asking for a deerstalker hat. They didn't have one until finally my family, when I was about 15 and a half, we took a trip to Toronto, Canada, and I went to a hat store, and because of that strong sort of British, Scottish influence, I suppose, the hat stores in Toronto carried deerstalker caps, and there it was. Of course, now I'm 15 and a half. I don't want a deerstalker hat. I would rather have the skin peeled from my body than go to school wearing a deerstalker, or go anywhere, be seen in public wearing a deerstalker. But at that point, I had no choice. I had to. The quest was over. I bought it. I still have it. And now I put it on every so often just so my children have something new to make fun of me about. But right at that time, I believe we're talking about like 1973, Nicholas Mayer published this book called The 7% Solution. That was really probably the most successful. There have been many pastiches of people writing their own Sherlock Holmes stories, but this was this became a bestseller. They made a movie out of it, and I read it, and I loved it, and it was really good. It was very faithful, and more than that, I was like, wait, you can do this? Like, you can write your own? You can just say, hey, I'm John Watson, and it was a foggy night, and there was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Hudson brought up the visitor, and Holmes was shooting up his cocaine, and you can just say all that stuff, and it's you, but you're Watson, and it was such a revelatory moment for me, and I thought, well, I'm going to do it too if he can do it. So right at that moment, my sixth grade English teacher assigned a short story, and we read a short story, and I said, I'm going to write a Sherlock Holmes short story, and since Mayer had his detective Holmes meeting Sigmund Freud, as I alluded to earlier, in the crossover with Sigmund Freud, I thought, well, I have to have a crossover too, obviously. So I had Sherlock Holmes meet Captain Nemo from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And they were fighting Professor Moriarty, who had an ironclad that he was going to be raiding shipping lines with, and so the novelist got involved, and I loved writing it so much. It was a completely revolutionary experience for me because I got to play with language in a focused way with a goal in mind of I need to make my words sound like Dr. Watson as written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. How do I do that? Well, how does he do it? And I would look closely, and I looked at how Nicholas Mayer did it, and what were the tricks Nicholas Mayer used to make me think he was being Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, being Dr. Watson, and to pay attention to language on that level, transform my attitude towards language, towards writing, towards what it meant to be a writer, to that you could play with the materials of greatness in a sense, and that by doing so you might get a little bit better at it yourself. That was all so powerful. And so that many, many, many years later, after I'd written a lot of books, and I was at a point where I was feeling very dissatisfied with my work, and especially with my short stories. And I started to look at short stories and think, well, what is a short story? Why do I want to write them? Whatever got me interested in short stories in the first place? Well, the answer was, the Red-Headed League, and the Speckled Band, and the Blue Carbuncle and the Six Napoleons, and those were my first short stories. And I went back and reread them, not for the first time, and something in me just said, here's a good place to start over. Like, you started with Sherlock Holmes and you were off and running, and now I have this feeling of dissatisfaction. I'm just going to start a Sherlock Holmes story. But this time it wasn't going to be a pastiche. I wasn't pretending to be Dr. Watson anymore. I was writing in a voice that I created specifically for that book. Which, if anything, I feel like my model was sort of a Virginia Woolf, more of a very interior kind of voice, very erudite voice, very psychologically interested mostly in what people are thinking and noticing more than anything else. Because after all, if you think about it, that's what Sherlock Holmes is best at, thinking and noticing. It was very much a restorative exercise for me, and it really worked. I mean, I loved writing that book, and when I was done with it, I did feel restored to a sort of more, I felt reintegrated, I guess you could say, with my original reading and writing self. All right. Well, thank you all for the good questions.
If you'd like to join us in the family room, that's immediately to the left across the courtyard.
That's an unbelievable performance.
Absolutely. Very insightful and funny.
And he brings the good stuff.
Yes. Good question.
I was just really thinking about that. I was